Imagine the scene. A family is enjoying a day at a familiar campsite. The sun is shining and the sounds of nature are all around. A 2-year-old child, full of life and laughter, vanishes in the time it takes to blink. One moment he's there, playing near his family. The next, he's gone. An enormous, frantic, multi-day search involving hundreds of trained professionals and volunteers scours the area, turning up absolutely nothing. Then, days later, he is found alive, but impossibly far away, miles from where he was last seen, across treacherous terrain that a seasoned adult would find a challenge to navigate. When he's finally able to speak, his first words are about a friendly bear that looked after him. This isn't a scene from a horror film or a fictional thriller. It's a genuine story, and it represents just one of the thousands of cases that fall under the chilling and mysterious umbrella of a phenomenon known as Missing 411. For decades, an alarming number of people have disappeared without a trace from national parks, forests, and vast wilderness areas all across North America. They don't just wander off, they vanish, often from the middle of a well-trodden trail, from their own backyard, or sometimes while standing just feet away from their loved ones. The official response is almost always immediate and massive. Huge search and rescue operations are launched, but they consistently find nothing. No tracks, no torn clothing, no scent for the highly trained search dogs to follow. And then, after the search is called off, a strange and unsettling silence descends. There's a seeming reluctance from government agencies and official bodies to acknowledge the bizarre patterns that appear to connect these deeply strange cases. Today, we're venturing beyond the simple explanation of people getting lost in the woods. We are diving deep into the most baffling and inexplicable cases, exploring the truly strange events that surround them. We will carefully examine the specific, peculiar criteria that seem to link these disappearances, from the victims being found at impossible distances to the eerie, unnatural quiet that sometimes blankets a search area just before or after a person goes missing. And throughout our journey, we'll be asking the one question that authorities seem determined to avoid: what is really happening in our national parks? Section 1. The concept of Missing 411. The term Missing 411 was coined by David Paulides, a man with a background as a police detective spanning 20 years. The origin story he presents is compelling. After retiring from the force, he was reportedly approached by an off-duty national park ranger. This ranger, speaking in confidence, expressed grave concern about the strange nature of some disappearances occurring within the parks, feeling that something was deeply wrong and that the official stories just didn't add up. Intrigued by this insider's fear, Paulides launched a personal investigation that would come to define his post-law enforcement career. However, it's worth noting that critics point out inconsistencies in his retelling of this story and the fact that Paulides was already engaged in Bigfoot research at the time, suggesting it might be an embellished narrative designed to launch his new project into the public eye. What he claims his investigation uncovered is a profoundly disturbing pattern of disappearances that defy conventional explanation. To be classified by Paulides as a Missing 411 case, a disappearance must meet a specific set of criteria. Cases with clear evidence of foul play, known mental health crises, voluntary disappearances, or suicide are intentionally excluded. The focus is purely on the unexplainable. Paulides' self-published books and documentary films claim there are over 1,400 of these unusual cases in the United States alone. It is critical to understand, however, that this figure has never been independently verified. Data analysts and statisticians argue that when you consider the millions of people who visit national parks each year, the number of disappearances isn't statistically unusual or outside the realm of tragic probability. The patterns Paulides highlights are the true heart of this enduring mystery. He asserts that victims often vanish near sources of water or in proximity to granite boulder fields. Of course, skeptics counter that these are common features in parks where people naturally congregate near creeks, rivers, and prominent geological landmarks. Paulides also points out that victims are frequently found without their shoes or boots, even in freezing conditions. A well-documented medical explanation for this is paradoxical undressing, a distressing symptom of severe hypothermia where the freezing individual feels an overwhelming sensation of being hot and removes their clothing. One of the most common and compelling claims is that search dogs, the most vital tool in any search, are often completely baffled. In case after case, they either fail to pick up any scent at all, or the trail abruptly stops as if the person was lifted into the air. Another frequently reported hallmark is the sudden and severe onset of bizarre weather, like a freak storm or dense fog, which hampers search and rescue efforts the very moment they begin. But perhaps the most unsettling claim revolves around where victims are ultimately found. They sometimes turn up in areas that had already been searched meticulously multiple times by grids of trained professionals. Skeptics rightly argue that human searchers, no matter how thorough, can simply miss things, or that a body can be moved by animal scavengers or water currents. It's crucial to state that Paulides' entire body of work is controversial. Critics accuse him of cherry-picking cases, ignoring evidence that doesn't fit, and weaving disparate details into a cohesive narrative to create a mystery for profit. Still, the stories themselves are undeniably compelling, and for the families of the missing, they are left with a lifetime of agonising questions. To truly grasp the phenomenon, we have to look at the cases that define it, and there's no better place to start than with the quintessential missing 411 disappearance, the case of Dennis Martin. Section 2, the disappearance of Dennis Martin. On June 14th, 1969, the Martin family was enjoying a Father's Day camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a cherished family tradition. 6-year-old Dennis Martin was full of energy, playing a game of hide-and-seek with his older brother and 2 other children. As a fun-loving group of boys, they decided to play a classic prank on their parents, planning to sneak up on the unsuspecting adults from different directions. Dennis's father, brother and grandfather all watched as he stepped behind a nearby bush to hide. He was supposed to leap out and shout, "Boo!" to complete the joke, but he never did. In those few seconds, in the middle of the afternoon, in broad daylight and within earshot of his family, Dennis Martin was gone. What followed was the largest and most extensive search operation in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The scale was immense, with over 1,400 people joining the effort, including National Guardsmen and other specialists. Compounding the tragedy, a severe thunderstorm violently struck the area that very afternoon, washing away any potential tracks and causing temperatures to plummet, a potential death sentence for a small boy dressed only in shorts and a t-shirt. The terrain there is notoriously rugged and densely forested. Despite the massive number of searchers combing the area, they found absolutely nothing. In a now familiar pattern, highly trained search dogs couldn't locate a scent trail. Then, the truly strange clues began to surface. A family that had been hiking about 7 miles away from the Martins' location later came forward to report hearing an enormous, sickening scream that afternoon. They also claimed to have seen a rough-looking, unkempt man hiding in the bushes along the trail, possibly carrying something obscured over his shoulder. At the time, authorities dismissed this lead as likely unrelated, struggling to believe a man could have covered that much difficult terrain so quickly with a child. The involvement of a US Army Special Forces team, the Green Berets, adds another layer of high strangeness to the case. Their presence at a civilian search for a lost child was highly unusual. While their official purpose was documented as a training exercise, their arrival fueled intense speculation that persists to this day, with many believing they were looking for something far more unusual than just a lost boy. As days bled into weeks, hope for finding Dennis alive faded. The most tangible clue ever discovered was a single, small footprint from a bare foot, or a shoe consistent with the Oxford-style shoes Dennis was wearing, but the trail went cold immediately. Many years later, a local ginseng hunter claimed he had stumbled upon the skeletal remains of a small child in a remote, hard-to-reach hollow. Fearing he would be arrested for illegal harvesting in the park, he said nothing at the time. When he finally led investigators back to the spot years after his discovery, there was nothing there. The case of Dennis Martin remains tragically unsolved. He disappeared in mere seconds under the watchful eyes of his family, sparking a colossal search that yielded nothing. His story embodies the core, unnerving questions of the missing 411 phenomenon and left his family shattered, forever without answers. But Dennis's case is not unique. Some of the most baffling cases involve toddlers who disappear in an instant, only to be found in circumstances that defy physical possibility. Section 3. The case of Dior Kuntz Jr. On July 10th, 2015, 2-year-old Dior Kuntz Jr. was on a camping trip with his parents, his great-grandfather, and a friend of his great-grandfather. They were in a remote part of Idaho, far from any town. In the late afternoon, a simple, heartbreaking miscommunication occurred. Dior's parents believed he was being watched by his great-grandfather down by the creek, while the great-grandfather, in turn, thought Dior was back at the campsite with his parents. In that small, innocent window of confusion, Dior Kuntz Jr. vanished completely. Panic immediately set in. The 4 adults frantically searched the small, relatively open campsite and the shallow, clear creek that bordered it before making a desperate call to 911. A massive search was launched, but just like in the Dennis Martin case nearly half a century earlier, the outcome was the same. Absolutely nothing. No tracks, no scraps of clothing, and, most unnervingly, no scent for the search dogs to follow. However, this investigation soon diverged sharply from the path of many so-called 411 cases. With no evidence whatsoever of an animal attack, and no clues to suggest Dior had simply wandered off and succumbed to the elements, investigators turned their focus inward toward the only other people present, the 4 adults at the campsite. The Lemhi County Sheriff eventually took the serious step of naming Dior's parents, Vernal Kuntz and Jessica Mitchell, as official suspects in his disappearance. The sheriff stated that the parents had been less than truthful during interviews and that both had reportedly failed polygraph tests, casting a dark cloud of suspicion over the grieving couple. Over the years, the situation grew more convoluted as private investigators hired by the family came to wildly conflicting conclusions. One pointed the finger squarely at the parents, alleging their involvement, while another became convinced of their innocence. The parents have always maintained their innocence, suggesting their son was abducted from the campsite. For years, the case has been stuck in a painful limbo, a cold case with no arrests and no closure. Then, in 2024, a glimmer of hope emerged. A private investigator discovered a child's fleece jacket snagged in a hard-to-reach, rocky area on a nearby mountain. It appeared to have bloodstains and animal claw marks on it. The jacket was from the correct time period and was sent away for DNA testing. However, the hope was short-lived. As of early 2026, authorities have stated that only a partial, degraded DNA profile could be obtained from the jacket, and therefore no definitive conclusion could be made linking it to Dior. His case highlights not only how quickly and completely a person can disappear, but also how intense suspicion can fall upon a family when no other explanation seems to make sense. Section 4. A synthesis of the bizarre. While individual cases like those of Dennis Martin and Dior Kuntz Jr. are deeply unsettling on their own, their true power in the missing 411 narrative comes from how they fit into a much larger, sprawling collection of alleged anomalies. When you begin to look at the hundreds of cases compiled by David Paulides, you start to see perplexing patterns that he argues are far too consistent to be dismissed as mere coincidence. One of the most mind-bending reported patterns involves young children being found at what seem to be physically impossible distances and elevations from where they went missing. Standard search and rescue protocols for lost children are built around a small radius because a toddler on their own simply cannot travel very far, very fast. Yet Paulides' work is filled with stories, many unverified, of 2- and 3-year-olds being found alive and well miles away from their last known location, often having crossed mountains, rivers and dense forests that would challenge a fit adult. Then there is the recurring and deeply strange issue of victims being found in areas that were already exhaustively searched. Search and rescue teams are meticulous, employing grid patterns and marking off zones as they are cleared, often sweeping a single area multiple times from different angles. So when a body suddenly appears in a location that has been definitively declared clear, it feels profoundly strange. Skeptics offer rational explanations. Perhaps tired searchers simply missed the body, or it was moved into the area by water currents or animal activity after the search had passed through. These are real and valid possibilities, but the reported frequency of this exact scenario in these types of cases is what believers find so unusual and difficult to explain away. Another reported phenomenon is what some witnesses have described as the Oz effect. This is where, in the moments leading up to a disappearance, witnesses report a sudden, unnatural silence falling over the area. The normal sounds of the forest, the birds, the insects, the wind, all just stop. This is purely anecdotal and scientifically impossible to prove, but it appears in witness testimonies just often enough to have become an integral part of the lore surrounding these cases. Perhaps most frustrating of all for those seeking concrete answers is the alleged lack of cooperation from official agencies, most notably the National Park Service. Paulides has long claimed that the NPS refuses to compile or keep a public centralised list of every person who has gone missing within the parks. He also states that his Freedom of Information Act requests for case files are met with bureaucratic resistance, long delays, and exorbitant fees for document retrieval. For its part, the NPS states this is to protect the privacy of victims and their families, which is standard procedure across law enforcement agencies. Paulides and his supporters, however, interpret this lack of transparency as a deliberate cover-up, a concerted effort to hide the true, alarming number of disappearances and the bizarre, inconvenient patterns he claims link them. When you weave all of these strange threads together, the supposed impossible distances, the reappearing bodies, the silent forests, and the administrative roadblocks, the picture that emerges is deeply and profoundly disturbing. It suggests a phenomenon with a consistent, baffling and terrifying profile, but one that remains heavily debated and shrouded in mystery. We are left staring into a profound and unsettling mystery, a void where answers should be. On one hand, you have the logical, skeptical, and often comforting explanations. The wilderness is, by its very nature, a dangerous and unforgiving place. People get lost, they have accidents, they succumb to the elements, and tragically, they are sometimes the victims of human predators. Critics argue, with many valid points, that David Paulides connects unrelated tragedies, cherry-picks data, and engages in confirmation bias to fit a compelling narrative he created, and that with hundreds of thousands of people reported missing in the US each year, a certain number are bound to occur in national parks under strange and inexplicable circumstances. On the other hand, the sheer volume of anecdotal patterns is difficult to ignore completely. The number of stories where highly trained search dogs are supposedly rendered useless, where toddlers are found alive miles away over impassable mountains, and where bodies inexplicably appear in previously searched areas, it all combines to challenge our fundamental understanding of what is possible. Even if you reasonably dismiss the vast majority of these cases as having rational, if tragic, explanations, a handful of them remain profoundly and stubbornly strange. The stories of Dennis Martin, D.R. Kuntz Jr. and the countless others are not just statistics or fodder for spooky stories. They are raw human tragedies, stories of families torn apart by unbearable uncertainty, left with a gaping void where information and closure should be. While theories about what is happening range from the mundane to the truly outlandish, from secret government projects and undiscovered predators to interdimensional portals and Bigfoot, the one thing we know for sure is that people are vanishing in our wilderness in ways we cannot always explain. The truth, whatever it may be, remains elusive, hidden somewhere out there in the vast, silent and indifferent outdoors. What do you think is behind the missing 411 phenomenon? Are these simply tragic accidents, amplified and distorted by a compelling storyteller? Or is there a darker, more mysterious, and perhaps more sinister force at work in our wilds? Let me know your theories and thoughts in the comments below. If this investigation into the unknown has captured your curiosity, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more explorations into the world's most baffling and enduring mysteries. Thank you for watching.